When I was 9 years old, my family moved back to Kansas City for the last time during my childhood. We had moved several times before between our family in Oklahoma City and to the community that we had found in Kansas City. This last move, was by far the hardest one for me. I was used to moving boxes and packing up my room, but this time it just felt different. It really was the first time I felt like I was grieving this deep loss. See, I loved where we lived, and I loved our neighborhood. I loved that I got to see my grandparents, my aunts and uncles and cousins all the time. I had also made really good friends, and I was doing really well in school. I was really happy. And then, in what felt like a split moment, it felt like all of it disappeared. And I was back in this isolated place where I felt like I didn't know anyone. School was hard again, and making friends felt impossible with the blooming of third grade cliques. And then once again, I was the only crimson-wearing, Sooner-cheering fan in a sea of KU blue. Those first few years when we moved back to Kansas City that final time were years that I spent living in denial and deep grief. In fact, I kept waiting for my parents to say the magic words. Guess what? We're moving home. I went as far as to dream and to plan and to build the excitement for what I would do when we would finally move back to Oklahoma City. However, those words never came. And with each visit to see family, I found it harder and harder to leave this place I loved behind. At times it felt like I was grieving this move all over again. I also remember during those first few years back, I would even correct my teachers, both at school and at Sunday school. Each time they would ask me about how things were at home, I would say, oh, you must mean our house in Kansas. That's not my home. We go home when we go to Oklahoma. It would be years before I would listen and accept the truth that Kansas City was my home too, and that there were some really good things about having two homes, and that my heart was big enough to love both places. Friends, some truths are really hard to accept, like moving to a new home. There are things we just don't want to hear. There are truths that are scary to listen to, and our hearts just want to reject them and pretend that they were never said in the first place. Perhaps this is because these truths make us feel hard emotions. They make us feel things like vulnerability, grief, and pain. Perhaps it's because if we acknowledge these truths, they remind us that we are only human, that we're mortal, that we're finite beings, and have limits to what we are able to do and to hold. And yet, daring to listen and hold space for these hard truths is holy work. And it is the way of being that God invites us into. Again and again, we are called to listen. Now, our gospel story today follows one of my favorite disciples, Peter. Peter is the kind of disciple who wants so badly to be the best. Peter wants to do everything so well, so he commits 110% of himself to everything he does. And yet, things always seem to go a little bit sideways. They never quite turn out the way Peter would have hoped. And today's story is no exception. Today, in this edition of Peter trying so hard to be the best disciple, we hear Jesus sharing the hard truth about his life and ministry. Jesus tells his beloved friends that the Son of Man must undergo great suffering, be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, the scribes, and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. And now, without missing a beat, Peter takes Jesus by the hand and begins pleading with him to not talk like that. It's almost as if this news, this emotion is too painful for Peter to bear. And because it makes him so uncomfortable, so vulnerable and afraid, he just can't stand it. So he tries to rebuke and silence Jesus. However, Jesus doesn't stay silent. Rather, Jesus startles everyone by saying, "Get behind me, Satan." Those are some strong words. By doing so, by proclaiming this, Jesus is saying that listening to truth, even when it's challenging, is part of the kingdom-building work of God. So by failing to listen to truth, we are denying God's people. And by doing so, we deny God. Listening to truth is uncomfortable. It can be painful. And yet this is the hard and holy work we are called to as faithful people of God. Again and again, we are called to listen. And so as we talk about this word listen today, I am reminded of the Shema from Deuteronomy 6:4. "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your strength." The opening line to this well-known passage teaches us something about listening. The name or the title of this, called Shema, actually comes from the very first word of the passage, which means to hear. However, in Hebrew, to hear doesn't just mean absorbing the sounds of the words. Rather, hearing or listening means taking these words to heart. It means etching these words upon our hearts and letting them shape our lives. Listening is deeper than just hearing the words spoken. Listening is part of transformation. It is how we allow the words we hear to shape our hearts and our lives to look more like God's. Again and again, we are called to listen. The story of Peter struggling to listen to the truth Jesus speaks, and also the truth God speaks in the midst of the transfiguration, is an invitation for each of us to consider what truth is hard for us to hold. For some of us, it might be letting go of what was, so that we might live more fully where we are now. Kind of like finding hope and comfort in a new home. For others, it might be feeling the grief that lays heavy on our hearts and allowing ourselves to grieve what we have lost. And still, for others of us, it might be reckoning with our own complicity, our own biases, our own privilege that has kept us from listening to the voices, truth, and cries of those who do not look or think or act like us. For some of us, it might even be hearing the truth over and over again that you matter, that you are enough. Beloveds, the hard truth you need to listen to right now might be one of these. It might be several of these, and it might be none of these. The truth you need to hold might be something different altogether. However, whatever that truth is for you, God invites us to be brave, to hold it, to honor it, not silence it, and not jump to fixing it or doing something about it. In fact, God reminds us again and again to listen. When we look ahead in the story of the Transfiguration, when Moses and Elijah are there and Peter responds wanting to build a dwelling for them, God responds back saying, listen. So friends, we must make space for these hard truths in our lives and in our communities. For when we listen and we allow the truth to be etched on our hearts, we begin to see the world differently. We experience growth and even transformation. Again and again, we are called to listen. Children of God, these past 6 months, we have been listening to some hard truths in our church. Not only have we been listening and discerning how to be church together in the midst of a global pandemic, but we have also been faced with the sobering truth of the cost to keep up and repair our well-beloved buildings and grounds. Listening for God's voice in this wilderness has been hard, holy work. And today, after countless conversations, deep research, faithful discernment, and a church-wide listening campaign, we will be voting on what the next steps forward will look like. No matter what the outcome today, our text today reminds us that it is imperative for us to continue to listen. It is important for us to continue to listen to God and to one another. As we take these next steps forward, may we continue to be willing enough to hold space for truth, to listen with our hearts, and to be brave enough for what we hear to change our lives and our faith and our hearts to look more like God's. Beloveds, today and every day, we are called to listen. And listening is good news. Friends, thanks be to God. Amen.